They say I'm crazy. They say I'm out of my mind. Maybe they're right. They say when, discussing the teachings of Neville, some people say that it's crazy, it's ludicrous, it's demonic, it's satanic. Why is this? And why has this been the challenge for every enlightened person throughout history? They say that Paul was mad. They say that Jesus was beside himself. And you can go throughout the list of the different prophets throughout scriptures. It's been said of all of them. But even people today, when the Wright brothers decided that they were going to build an airplane, they were mad, they were crazy. When we talked about blood transfusion, heart transplants, people said that these people were crazy. Anytime we look at doing something different or we speak of something different, when we talk about your transformation, people are going to say that you're crazy. Recently somebody said on the YouTube channel that, this is why kids are so delusional because they're being taught that they can become anything they want to be, do, or have. And so they ascribe that these teachings are, ludicrous or satanic or whatever. It's not that. It's that even those who seemingly are supposed to be spiritual, let's say Christians or whatever the belief system is, are operating from a rational mind reasoning 5 sense level, and they don't understand what's being taught to them. If you go from Genesis to Revelation, it's a book of insanity. What do I mean by that? The stuff that was spoken through scripture by the normal everyday person was considered insane. When Paul was speaking to King Agrippa said, Paul, you're beside yourself. You're mad. Paul said, I wish that everybody was like me except for these chains. Why is that? Because most of us are judging what Jesus told us not to do. Most of us are judging according to the 5 senses. We believe, even at a Christian level, most Christians believe that what we're seeing on the without is reality. So when somebody talks about mind travel and various other aspects of spirituality, when they talk about mind creates reality, because we've been so conditioned to this world, we say, that's crazy talk. That's insanity. Who's teaching that? And the teachers are written off in many cases because the world hasn't gotten to the place of understanding that mind creates reality. Now, of course, many self-help gurus understand this and many spiritual people understand this. But understand, that's probably about 3% of your population. Now, of course, many millionaires and billionaires begin to understand the principles of how mind works, and they start visualizing and, of course, begin getting the results. So why is it that the normal, everyday person doesn't understand that mind creates reality? Well, let's talk about it. And we're going to go to scripture and we're going to talk about how you can begin using the tools of your mind to transform your world. Listen, it doesn't matter what your belief system is, your religion, all of that stuff goes out the window. You have to begin understanding that your thoughts are creating your reality. And it's the only thing that can. And if you want to change your reality, you have to change your thinking. It took me a long time to get this fully, and I'm still learning. But at a basic level, I fought against this because I was indoctrinated by so-called religion. And it wasn't until I transcended my religious beliefs and started making them my practical beliefs. Now, many people in the religious arena believe that they're doing that, but they're still judging according to the senses. They are operating from a mindset that says seeing is believing. But scripture has had it for thousands of years that believing is seeing. Now, Christians and religious people may quote that, but when reality hits, they don't believe it. And I often say that lifestyle will always mirror our beliefs. Whatever it is that we truly believe, that's what's going to show up in our world. Jesus called it fruits. But let's go on and talk about this lesson about crazy talk. Jesus said this, and if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto me. Now, many people, they just look at this as symbolic of Jesus being lifted up on the cross. And at a rational man mind reason level, I understand why they would think that. But when you start going deeper into the esoteric metaphysics, you realize that from Genesis to Revelation, it's a love letter to you, the individual. Many people believe that scripture is a mass agreement, as it were, but it really is an individual agreement. And then these individuals come together in masses. But as Jesus told Nicodemus, unless a person is born again, they cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. It's individual. It's not a group. No group is brought in collectively. Each person must come into their own realization. So when we begin to understand at a spiritual level that from Genesis to Revelation, it's talking to us. It's talking to you, the individual. So when we hear the I am being Jesus, when we look at Jesus, Jesus means salvation or the self-existing one. When you read the term Jesus, you can also replace the word Jesus with I am. This is who God told Moses that he was at the burning bush. He said, tell them that I am that I am. Now you say, well, why is that relevant? Anytime we use the name I am, we're linking whatever we're saying about I am to the creator of the universe. And in that name I am is the name of God. Like I said, if we say I'm abundant, for example, and we begin operating as a man, woman thinks in his or her heart, so is he, so is she. When we're thinking from a heart level, we're talking about thinking from feelings, what we truly believe about ourselves at a core level. So recently I had a post out there and Neville Goddard was talking about basically how thoughts create reality. And somebody responded to the post and said, this is why kids start to believe that they can do almost anything. And I think that this is more destructive, than telling kids the truth. And I said, well, isn't it fortunate that those kids have you to remind them how little they are and what they can't become, and so the person came back and said, what you're teaching is satanic. And it's funny, anytime there's something that we don't understand, especially in the religious community, we want to deem it satanic. This has been happening to religious, spiritual leaders throughout the course of history. They told Jesus that he had a demon. They told Paul that he was mad. So hearing satanic from religious people is not uncommon. When Galileo said that the earth revolved around the sun, they said he was crazy. They said he was mad. They said that he was demonic. When people started talking about space travel, again, there were those naysayers saying, men were not meant to fly when we're talking about something as simple as the Wright brothers. Anytime we start looking outside the traditional norm, you're going to be challenged. But a lot of times people are challenging because of their fear and their lack of understanding. But as they grow in understanding, then all of a sudden, what they called one day demonic is all of a sudden self-evidence. We have to get to the place to understand that scripture is not rational. From Genesis to Revelation, it's irrational. Matter of fact, it says that, these are peculiar people. Many times as believers, as spiritual people, we want to operate and look at scriptures from a rational level. But listen, you're talking about people that stop the sun in its tracks, people that knock down walls by speaking words, people that spoke to burning bushes, people that were few that sent tens of thousands of people to flight. There's nothing rational about scripture. Even when we go into the New Testament, we're talking about a child that was born of a virgin. We're talking about a person that went around healing those who were in need of his time, multiplying bread simply with a word, raising the dead. There's nothing rational about scripture. The most irrational people in the world to be those who understand that this is my story being told. And the Christ Spirit, Jesus said, the works that I've done, even greater works will you do. The problem is most of Christianity and spiritual teaching is trapped in 2,000 years ago. Up until the time of Jesus, scripture was always being, as it were, evolved. Even at the time of Paul, Paul started teaching or expounding on the teachings of Jesus. And even early church started to expound on things. Now, all of a sudden, 2,000 years plus later, we're feeling that we're stuck in the history of 2,000 years. Now, what do I mean by that? There's a lot of things in scripture that spoke to the climate of its time. For example, talking about the woman's dress, for example, because of the culture and so forth, women's heads were to be covered. Today in churches, people are still teaching that as though that's current today. You understand what I'm saying? A lot of things that were taught in scripture wasn't per se religious in nature. It was practical because it was speaking to the people of that day, just like there's certain things that we would talk about related to health in our day that maybe 100 years from now won't even be relevant. But for those who don't understand 100 years from now, they'll still teach it as though it's doctrine, if you understand what I'm saying. But a lot of times, even with what was being said, speaking from a cultural standpoint, really had spiritual applications. So it went much deeper than what was being taught. And many of us, like I said, we're still stuck in doctrine that was relevant for the time, but not necessarily relevant for today. Now, some people come back and say, well, scriptures, no, you're missing the point. There's certain things that were speaking to the culture of that time. Now, what we're not talking about is things that were called sin or whatever. Those things can still harm you. But for example, like I said, just that simple illustration of a woman covering her head. We're in a different culture. So, of course, now scripture would speak to the culture of today. Now, I know that some people would think that, we got to stay to the word of the law. And I'm not discounting the essence of the law, what it spoke of. But even more than that, a lot of scripture goes much deeper than what you're reading on the page. There's spiritual applications, and I'm going to share some of that with you in a moment. Jesus says, listen, and again, remember, Jesus is the self-existing one, the I am. So anytime you say I am, this is drawing God and attracting that into your life, or you're merging, impregnating the Spirit of God to birth that ideal, that concept into your life. You're basically joining God. Paul said, no, you're not. That when you're with a prostitute, you're joining God with a prostitute. When you say I am, you're joining the creative force in you with whatever you're saying I am, and the creator of the universe is, be it unto you according to your faith, according to your belief. So Jesus says, if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto me. Now, like I said, many people would just stop at the crucifixion and say, well, that's what he meant. There's deeper spiritual applications. And like I said, from Genesis to Revelation, it's your story. Now, you say, well, Coach, how can I begin to identify and know the story that's being told to me? What is it that you want to manifest in your life? What is it that you want to do, be, or have? This is the key to receiving that some people will call crazy talk. But bear with me for a second. It says, if I be lifted up. Now we're speaking from the first person, I. If I, Coach DeCarlo, be lifted up from the earth. What is the earth? The earth is what we call reality, the 5 sense man. When Jesus was walking on water, Peter bidded him to summon him to come out and walk on water. And Jesus said, come out and walk on water. Peter started to walk on water, but then he started looking at the waves and the things going on around him, and he started to sink. All of us are told, not to judge according to appearance, but judge righteously. To judge righteously is to judge according to what it is you want to manifest in your world, not according to what you see currently in your reality. So when it says, if I be lifted up from the earth, we're talking about a rise in consciousness. When I cease to judge according to the five senses, but judge according to faith, a favorable anticipation and thoughts held, when I begin judging according to faith, I start thinking and believing, or thinking from, as Neville would say, thinking from what it is that I want to be, do, or have. I see myself having that which I want to be, do, or have. Jesus said it this way: say not that there's 4 months to harvest, but the harvest is ripe now. We need gatherers now. Jesus saw the thing that they wanted, the harvest, the manifestation, as already being a reality. But he says people need to be taught this, so we need to have harvesters to see according to what it is they want to manifest. See, if you believe that you have to wait a certain amount of time, you'll always push that manifestation out. It says, if I, in consciousness, be lifted up, a rise in consciousness, not thinking from my human 5 cents, this is crazy mindset, but thinking according to what it is I want to manifest. I will often talk about this young man because I was so impressed with how he used the law of attraction. But Karl Runefeld was a young man that worked in a grocery store. And 5 years ago, he decided, I want to be wealthy. 2 years after making that decision, he was a multimillionaire. 5 years passed, he's a billionaire. What happened? He had a change in consciousness. He had a rise in consciousness. He was lifted up in consciousness. Jesus says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so will I be lifted up. When we're talking about Moses and the serpent in the wilderness, if you go back to the Old Testament, what happened was the people were complaining. Now, understand this. The only thing you can get from your complaint is more to complain about. And that's what you're going to draw in your world. Moses had to distract the people from their complaining because, of course, now because they were complaining, they were being plagued by serpents and they were being bitten by these serpents, and many people were dying from their own complaints. Moses took his rod and created a serpent around it and lifted it up, and everyone that looked upon the rod with the serpent on it, they were healed. What happened? They changed their attention. They moved from complaining to healing. They started seeing healing in the serpent on the pole. When you change your attention, so will you change your energy flow. And in changing your energy flow, then of course, you're going to change your manifestation. So Jesus says, listen, if I, like the serpent in the wilderness, be lifted up from the earth. So when I'm lifted up in consciousness, changing my trajectory, my focus, I will begin to draw all men. He says men, man, female, made he them. So he's talking about both man and female. In the word man is manifestation. So I will draw all manifestation unto me. What is it that you want to manifest in your life? If I be lifted up in consciousness and see myself doing, being, and having that which I want to do, be, and have, and begin operating, living from that mindset, I will draw the manifestation or man unto me. The reason why many of us don't have the thing that we desire is because our focus is on what we don't want. When we're lifted up in consciousness and we begin focusing on what it is that we want, then that's what's going to be manifested or drawn or attracted into our lives. Now, we see people do this time and time and time again, but we look at them as exceptions to the rule. Jesus was not an exception to the rule. He was an example to us. And he says, the works that I've done, even greater works will you do. Creators, you have to understand that your thoughts are creative. And everything, the shirt, the clothes that I'm wearing currently started off as somebody's ideal. Everything around you started off as someone's ideal. If you want more money, better health, a loving relationship, whatever it is that you want, you have to begin lifting yourself up in consciousness, believing that the thing that you desire is possible, not the how. The how is not your business. Your job is to see it as possible. Abraham was told, Abraham, leave your family, or what we call the familiar, and go to a land that I will show you. Once he got to the land, God said, look out. And everything that you see, everything that your foot treads upon, so shall your descendants inhabit. Now, when he talked about the scene, he was telling Abraham to see it first in his imagination. Abraham did not see the fulfillment of the promise of all of his descendants. He had one child, Ishmael, and the other, Isaac. And they started to reproduce. But Abraham did not see the fulfillment of the promise. So, well, let me correct myself. He did see it. He saw it in the imagination. And let me give you a quick story before we end. Walt Disney, on his deathbed, one of his acquaintances came to him and said, man, it's just beautiful what you've done, all the stuff that you've created. I'm just saddened that you're not going to be able to see the completion of Disney World. And Walt said, man, are you crazy? He said, I've seen it in my mind hundreds, if not thousands of times. He says, that's how it was created. Walt Disney understood that imagination creates reality. And the only thing he had to do first and foremost is see it in his mind's eye first. And he knew that he could outpicture into what we currently call reality. But as what Mr. Lindo often will say, it's only new as ideal. Everything else is secondhand. So anything that you're seeing in the world around you is secondhand. It was only new as an ideal, and then it was outpictured or created in what we call reality. If you want your life to change, first and foremost, start by changing what it is that you're giving your mental attention to on a daily basis. Then begin living from your new ideal and watch how it shows up in your world. This is Coach DeCarlo saying, remember this, that only you can create your perfect world. Not God or man. Only you can create your perfect world. Until we speak next time, have a great and abundant day.